In 1981, a family's weekend in Keddie turned into a nightmare. Mysterious phone calls, a missing sister, lost evidence, and a chilling crime scene have led investigators to reopen the case. Today we discuss the gruesome Keddie Cabin Murders. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the paranormal. I'm your resident mystery lover, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing this case for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
Whoa. Okay. Interesting. It's recently been reopened?
Relatively recently.
Okay.
It has been cracked back open. We're going to get into the nitty gritty, but there's some worries about how it was handled in the first place, why it was closed and then opened again. But it's a gruesome case. And so whoa is the most appropriate first response to it, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare when you come across a case that's been reopened even somewhat recently. So I'm very intrigued to know, because it sounds like there's potential mishandlings, but, we'll dive into it.
Okay, little gut instinct coming through. Again, I know you're a little psychic. I know you deny it, but it's there. But it's interesting because there's definitely the question of, was this mishandled? Was this ignorance? Or is there a conspiracy behind it? That's kind of what we're going to talk about towards the end in the theories. But I want you to be thinking about that as we get into this case. Of course, sensitive topics galore. This is one of those true crime cases that gets pretty brutal. So there's a lot of topics that we're going to talk about. We'll put a list of those in the description for your convenience. But before we do dive into the case, I want to give a huge shout out to the task force members over on our Patreon that support us each and every month, where you can get bonus content, ad-free podcast, movie club podcast, so much other good stuff. But we have Eyebones, Snorting Turtle 1, and of course, our squonks holding down the fort, the swamps as it were. Got Azrael, Chase Martinez, Broman, and many others. So thank you all so much. Patreon.com/RedWeb if you want to learn more about that. Oh, and Fredo, I know we record these pretty far in advance, but today is the day. Listen, Task Force, we'll leave this in. Unless I mess up, today is the day that the store is launching. You can go get yourself some Red Web merch now, finally. I don't know what the link is going to be, honestly, so check out our social. I'll try to do something like redwebpod.com/store or something like store.redwebpod.com.
There'll be a link. This is hot off the press, okay? This is piping hot.
I'm still putting it together behind the scenes right now. So this is me hoping I make it happen. But yeah, another big thing, since it's July 29th, the day that we're launching this podcast, if you want to we have a founder's piece of merch for all the people who want to support us out the gate. We're going to have that live for about a month, maybe through August. So if you want to get exclusive access to that shirt, August is the time to do that. But of course, we have all your old favorites. We have some new shirts in there as well. And we'll keep it fresh as seasons go on. But yeah, our store is live. Super stoked to be doing it.
Hell yeah. Thank you guys for the love and support and allowing us to live this life independently.
Absolutely. Dude, honestly, I'm going in my closet going, I kind of need this merch store just so I can refresh my closet.
I got like half my closet full of shirts that it's time to retire them.
I think you and I are getting too buff scientists on us. We're just bulging out of these old shirts. But I'm very excited because they're comfort colors. That's the blank that the shirt is. It's a very high quality, doesn't shrink. I love this shirt material. Anyway, let us dive into this case. Put on your investigative hat. And I'm going to give you some background too to kind of give you the feels as we head into the day. So let's wind it back. After escaping an abusive marriage, Glenna Susan Sharp, aka Sue, relocated her 5 children across the US from Connecticut all the way to Northern California. And this was in 1979. By 1980, the family was renting Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resorts in a small town also known as Keddie, where the family grew well connected to their neighbors. We're going to see about that in the case, and many other cabins in the area. And by 1981, when the case takes place, son John was 15, Sheila was 14, Tina was 12, Ricky was 9, and Greg was 5. This particular evening, Sheila was the one actually staying out with the Seabolt family in cabin 27, and it is with her eyes that we witness this case unfold, unfortunately. She's the one who kind of walks in on this entire scene. So the morning of April 12th, 1981, Sheila Sharp was returning home from her sleepover. Upon opening the door around 8 a.m., Sheila was met with the gruesome sight. Her older brother John, her mother Sue, and John's friend Dana Wingate were all bloodied with their bodies strewn throughout the living room. At some point during the night, an intruder or intruders entered the cabin and killed her family. All of the victims had been stabbed or struck with a hammer, it seemed, and then wrapped with medical tape and electrical wires, which is above and beyond gruesome, right?
Jesus.
A brutal way to go about it, but then also bringing the tape and the wires to kind of tie them together. I believe John was on his stomach and his feet were wrapped with electrical wire that were also connected to Dana's feet. It was a lot, honestly.
See, it's just, home invasions are terrifying. Gruesome was the outcome of this one.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like the worst case scenario. And then the ripple effect, right? Like, how do you deal with coming home and seeing that?
I don't know if you do. This is just so gnarly, man.
I feel like you're in therapy. I agree. Very gnarly.
Yeah.
You're just in therapy for the rest of your life at that point.
Mm-hmm.
This is where, on like a personal level, like I've had this discussion with my significant other. Like, I do strongly believe that firearms need to be heavily restricted in the United States. It's too easily accessible. At the same time, I've had this discussion and, said, well, because my significant other doesn't want a firearm in the house.
Sure.
I don't either, right? A lot of times bringing a firearm into the house can cause an injury or,
Oh, yeah. Accidents can super happen. You got to treat it with respect.
Yeah, those statistics are very bad. I am pushing to have one in the house because my thought here is, if someone enters my home with a firearm, what am I to do if I do not have one? Or like a panic room or what, you know what I mean? If someone enters my home and is going room by room, searching for me or my significant other to harm us with a firearm, what the hell am I going to do with a knife, a baseball bat? I mean, like, what? Do I just pray that I know the layout and can get a jump on this person? What if it's two people, And so it's just like one of those things where, like, home invasions, man, they're a thing, and I just feel like I need to have protection. Unfortunately, it's a situation of fight fire with fire, because what am I to do, especially in the state of Texas? And even then, in the state of Texas, if someone's in your home and they're not supposed to be, you have the right to, to take action on that person. So I don't know, man. It just brings up a whole can of worms, and that's where my mind goes with this whole discussion, because I don't know, like, would they have been better off having a firearm?
Right.
It shouldn't be that way, but you just, I don't know. It's such a difficult discussion.
100%. This is such one of those brutal cases where you can't help but think emotionally, because it is family centric. You have a young daughter walking in on this. And so, it's right for your mind to go immediately to, how do I defend against something like this? I understand the conversation of not wanting to escalate violence with the response of violence, but, and obviously this person didn't even perpetuate the crime necessarily with a gun. Obviously a hammer and a knife are the main weapons. We'll talk about the introduction to a BB gun or a pellet gun later. But
interesting.
The point is, like, when you're confronted with this level of violence, how do you prepare yourself, even if it's just mental preparation, to like feel like a safety blanket,
Right. Even to just how do you de-escalate that without a firearm? You know what I mean? Like, I don't.
Sure. I mean, I get you.
Yeah, even if it's just like a blunt object, it's like, how do you de-escalate that? If you had like a bat yourself, I don't know if that does the trick, right? As opposed to, you have a blunt force object, I have a firearm.
Right. So all that is to say is like, I know exactly why your mind goes there, especially with such a case like this. When it's so family centric, you have a mom who's with 5 children. One was, staying out in the cabin next door, but still, like, there's a lot of responsibility there. And I don't know, it's hindsight is 2020 when you see these things happen.
Yeah, it's just a scary thought, but
it's
also,
a very scary thought.
A reality.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of the reality that we're in. Now, coming back to this scene, Sheila walks in. Closest to the door, again, was her older brother John on his stomach, tied via electrical wire to Dana's feet. John's hands were bound with the medical tape I mentioned before, and Dana seemed to have a head injury. Sue was somewhat covered with a blanket, and by then, blood had soaked through, indicating that it had been some time since this happened. Maybe it happened more towards the middle of the night, and we'll get there, but her bottoms had been removed. Her mouth was gagged with a blue bandana, as well as her own underwear. In addition to stab wounds in her neck and her head had been injured by blunt force. She had a major horizontal stab wound as well in her chest that injured her larynx. I mean, this is, again, a very violent attack here. And investigators would later reveal that based on the nature of her injuries, it indicated that a struggle must have taken place.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So the autopsies would later show that Sue and John died from their injuries, both from their throats being slit, and Dana died from asphyxiation. Strangest of all, her youngest brothers. Now, this is kind of the upside as well as being a very strange element to this case, but her youngest brothers, Greg and Rick, along with neighbor Justin Smart, were all asleep in the bedroom, apparently unaware of any attack having taken place, and were all completely and physically unharmed. They were in the back room of the cabin.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So Sheila left. She goes back to cabin 27 to let the Seabolts know. The teenage son, Jamie Seabolt, then goes over to cabin 28 where the thing took place and then went through the house through the back door, potentially contaminating the scene, but that's neither here nor there. He then went into the boys' bedroom and slipped them out the window because, of course, he wouldn't want them to see the scene that laid outside the bedroom door.
No, definitely not. It's one thing hearing about it, let alone seeing it. That's just, I don't know, that's a whole nother level of anxiety and stress and problems.
So I'm going to share with you now an image of the backside of that cabin so you can kind of get an idea of A, what these cabins looked like, the size of them, but also, importantly for future conversations, kind of how close they are, because that will definitely be an element that comes to play.
Oh, these look tiny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, this is... I want to go camping or glamping, but it's just you're so isolated sometimes, and it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
Where do you go? I don't know. It's kind of like an unnecessary fear, but a fear nonetheless.
It's kind of like that movie Hush, right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
A fantastic film. Also very unsettling. There's also a bunch of other movies of houses in the middle of nowhere, but basically just like feeling so remote that you're essentially helpless. As
right.
In this movie, slowly the power lines are cut, the phone lines are cut, the door is locked, unlocked, whatever, and this person's just going around. Unsettling for sure. Totally agree with you.
It just feels too easy to be locked in.
Sure. Yeah. So Jamie slips the boys out the window. They then go back to cabin 27 to kind of wait until the police arrive. And it took them about an hour, but an hour later, the police arrived at the scene. They reported that there was blood everywhere, on the clothes, the walls, the ceiling, furniture, and even the bottom of their feet, indicating that perhaps somebody had staged or moved the bodies. Maybe it indicates that since there's blood on their feet, that they were walking around as part of the resist or trying to escape. I don't know, but it is interesting that the bottom of their feet were covered in the blood as well. Now, the lights were turned off and all the curtains had been closed. Of course, it was night. Maybe that's how the situation was found, or maybe that's whoever did this just didn't want anyone to see it until they had a chance to escape. Now, it did not appear that whoever did this forced their way in. There didn't seem to be any signs of forced entry. And we've seen this before, Fredo, in previous cases where that seems to be the case. What stands out to me is, all right, perhaps this was someone that they knew. That person knocked on the door, they were let in. maybe the door was unlocked. Maybe they're so friendly with their neighbors. After all, their daughter is staying next door. Let's unlock the doors that way in case she comes home, and it just happens to be bad timing.
I mean, it very well could be that kind of situation.
Yeah. Now, according to Plumas County News, John actually slept in the basement, which only had a door to the outside. I'll share a picture of that with you now. It does give a little bit more size to the cabin. You can see that they're sitting on a hill, so the hill almost hides the basement, and so they're a little bit bigger than the first image.
Okay, yeah, there's definitely more depth because of the slant.
Yeah.
Than I thought there was.
But you can see the back stairwell that Jamie took up into the house. This is also a stairwell I'll refer to in just a second, but the door to the main house here was kept unlocked, apparently, again, according to the news, so that John could kind of come and go as he pleased, especially since he was staying in the basement. This was the way to get upstairs. So it seems that maybe instead of our preconceived notions, maybe that this was just an unfortunate situation, unfortunate fact of the case.
It also just, oh man, it's just the thought of someone outside even, you know?
Oh my God.
Obviously they got in, but the thought of someone outside kind of circling the house looking to, you know, moments away from like breaking in to cause harm to you, that's a high tension moment.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh man, I don't even know. Like, I would just pray that the family, you know, didn't know it was coming, kind of thing, out of some level of solace. But given the state of the scene, I don't know, it's just heartbreaking to say the least.
It really is.
Now, when it comes to fingerprints and DNA analysis, we've talked about this many times before as well. And investigators kind of indicated that it seems likely that the killers were wearing gloves to prevent leaving fingerprints around the house. This was something that by this time, you know, early 80s, it was abundantly clear that that's something that a criminal should do, because they figured that was the only way to be traced back to them. But this was also before DNA analysis, and in the modern reopening of the case, DNA analysis does come to play, but there's a few issues with that we'll talk about. But in short, after analyzing the scene, taking photographs, and then sending the bodies off for autopsies to get more answers, they all then realized that Shayla's younger sister, Tina, was completely missing, with no sign of her to be found. And by this time, a half a day had passed. So now Tina's younger sister is essentially kidnapped, and most likely by whoever did this.
Oh my goodness. It's just like, you think the worst is over, and then there's still a possible ongoing situation.
Right.
God.
It's gnarly. It's so gnarly, man.
It's just, that's what I'm saying, man. Like, it's just, what do you do if you can't defend yourself?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like at that point, you're at the whims and the will of whatever they want to do. They want you to do something. You know, you're gonna be forced to do it. They want to take someone, take you. Boom. You know, it's just like, oh God.
Yeah. I think to bring some levity to the situation, I have to call out now, because this case is particularly heavy. I want to call out the jokes we make now, but to bring some levity, I feel like I would home alone my house if I were living in a cabin like this. I would have a flamethrower hooked up to the back door that only a certain code could deactivate. I'd have one of those like pitfalls at the front door that just goes to the basement. You know, I don't know. I'm also like low-key paranoid because I do this podcast with you, and so we hear about all the nefarious deeds that people can do.
Yeah, we hear the worst of the worst situations.
Right. So I don't want to be alarmist, but it is like, man. Like,
but also maybe like you know, I'm with you on a trap that, you know, if set off correctly, sets them on fire, and then two needles swing down and then pop their eyeballs, and then then the gun pops up and then fires 6 rounds. You know, it's just maybe a Home Alone trap like that.
Maybe a Home Alone trap where the 2 cans of paint that come down are to actually do the damage that they would have done.
It's just cans of paint filled with bullets.
Oh my God. Well, that'll certainly do some damage.
And knock them out.
Now, as we go into the investigation phase of this particular case, I know there's a lot of names, a lot of relationships. So let me recap. We have this whole family, right? But let's break it down kind of by category. We have 3 victims: John, the older brother; Sue, the mother; Dana, John's friend. Of course, we have Tina, the younger sister to Sheila, is missing and in the cabin, but alive, sleeping through all of this, which is still interesting to me. It perks my attention up because it sounded like such a violent act, but they seemingly didn't know much about it. You have Greg and Rick, both younger brothers, as well as Justin, the neighbor.
God, there could have been so many more people like injured in this situation. It's so wild.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that will totally manifest in one of the theories. I think we have the person. I think we clearly know who this person is, and I'm eager to get to that section of the theories.
Whoa, that's not something we usually end up settling on or coming to.
I like feeling like we got an answer, but I hate knowing that there's a second theory that, again, I use this phrase a lot, muddies the waters.
Yep.
So let's wind back the clock a little bit. I think this will help with the investigation, give a little bit more context as to what the family was doing in the day prior, the days coming up to this, because it might open us up to some suspects. So winding that clock back a bit, the day before had been like any other. Sue, Sheila, Greg all drove to pick up Rick from baseball in nearby Quincy, California. That was around 11:30 a.m. And just for anybody who loves those maps and details, that's about a 6-mile drive or just shy of 10 kilometers south, I believe. On the way home, they picked up John and Dana as they were hitchhiking. The two of them were hitchhiking from Quincy back to Keddie. So this gives you the sense that this is a very neighborly area, that everyone's kind of friendly, hence the unlocked door policy. I grew up in the Midwest. I know that feeling.
Yeah, it's usually, what is it? The statistic is higher than you think when it comes to, it being someone that the person knows or like a family member.
Yeah.
And then you also are in this place where everyone is so friendly and everyone feels like family. Doors are left unlocked.
Right. It's a recipe for disaster, but again, that's with hindsight. It's easy for me to look back at this and go, oh God, you shouldn't do that. But also, they had probably been doing that for a long time with no issue. So now everybody's back home up in Keddie, but later that day around 3:30 p.m., John and Dana once again hitchhiked back down to Quincy where they were seen downtown by witnesses. Now it's unclear when they returned to the cabin in Keddie, but obviously to me, the driver taking them back to Keddie would be a prime suspect. So I looked into this with Jillian, asked her a few things about it. We tried to look at all the resources we have. We try to cite our sources and look at every article possible. And from our research, this person was interviewed by police, yet their name and all the info about that has not been made public, which is on one hand understandable, but on the other hand, I know the second theory. So just remember this.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Jumping forward a few hours around 8:30 p.m., Sheila left cabin 28 to go next door to the Siebold's cabin in 27. Again, we've seen now via the image pretty much how close these cabins are. Not too far anyway. This is where her sister Tina had already been hanging out that day. So we know where Tina is at this time. And as we know, Sheila would end up staying the night there, but Tina would return to cabin 28, her home, around 9:30 p.m. It was around that time that the Siebold's actually reported a green van in front of cabin 28. Later, searches for Tina focused around an area of the house, like a 5-mile radius or an 8-kilometer radius of the cabin, but police still couldn't find her. We'll talk more on her particular disappearance and subsequent finding later on.
I guess they were searching just the immediate 5-mile area just in case the body was dumped somewhere.
Right.
As opposed to, an abduction.
Right. There's two angles here. If it's an abduction, obviously the more time goes on, the bigger that radius gets because they can travel. If it is a murder and she's taken from the scene elsewhere, then yeah, it would probably be to your instincts in a nearer radius. But we'll get to that answer in a little bit. But due to Tina's disappearance as a possible abduction, the case was passed to the FBI for a time period, and soon after, the California Department of Justice then took on the case. So this again, I'm laying some of the groundwork for one of the conspiracy theories behind this case. Now back at the scene, 3 weapons were found: a hammer, a bent steak knife, and a butcher knife. Sue's injuries indicated that one of the weapons used was also likely a Daisy 880 BB gun. Again, I'm simplifying the discovery of some of these things that we'll talk about later, but the reason why they were able to figure out that it was a Daisy 88 BB gun is because she had indentations, marks on her face and on her head that looked like the butt of a weapon. And they found pieces of broken plastic at the scene that were part of this BB gun, and so when they brought one to the scene, it matched the wounds. In fact, they might have brought it to the autopsy, but they basically matched the butt of this particular BB gun to the wounds on Sue.
I mean, I guess they were trying to pretend that it was a firearm because BB guns, a lot of them look really realistic.
That is a great point. That could totally be part of, obviously they're wearing gloves, they drew the curtains, so there's some meditation happening here. And I don't want to tease it too much, but we also have the three boys in the back room. Were they unaware of them or were they not? That's another thing. So there's a lot of conscious effort happening. So I wouldn't put it past them to be like, let's muddy the waters by like making it look like other weapons were here.
How far is this back room again? Because I'm sure there's a ton of screaming and yelling, and to not be heard is, you know.
I'm very happy you brought that up because that is exactly what my instincts were saying. So it's hard to say. We tried to find as many images as possible, and I was desperate to find a map of this place. And after we're finished recording this, I'm actually going to continue researching to see if we can't find that, to post that as part of our social post. But looking at the second image I gave you, it's really hard to say. You see 3 windows on the side of the house. It's at an isometric angle. I would say maybe the house is at most 30 feet deep. And this took place in the living room, which was closer to the front door. And the bedroom that they were in was at the back of the house. I believe that's the window you can see at the top of the stairs, maybe there at the back.
Man, that's not that far back.
Right. And also the cabins are close, right?
Yeah.
So coming back to the investigation a little bit, of course it was a violent scene. Police indicated that blood was everywhere, so they had blood spatter analysis, and that revealed that all the murders must have taken place in the living room. Though an unidentified fingerprint was found on the rails of the back stairway. That kind of goes nowhere. We don't really get anything out of that, but it is interesting because it doesn't match any of the family members, victims, or neighbors that we know were there.
Interesting that it's unidentified. Is it like a partial print? Like, how is it, you know?
It just seems like it might have been from somebody that they weren't expecting to have been there. So maybe before these perpetrators or perpetrator, maybe before they put the glove on. Who's to say, you know?
Yeah.
Now, this is where we open up to your instincts here. So despite the apparent violence, almost no one nearby heard anything. In fact, only neighbors from cabin 16 reported waking up to muffled screaming around 1:15 a.m. And so this is why I really want to get a map of where the cabins are, what numbers are what, because if 16 is the only one hearing this, maybe you can sleep through muffled screams. Sure. My instinct is maybe this is Tina being abducted and she's in a van, or I don't know, maybe that green van or some other vehicle, hence the muffling. But if there's any screams happening, how is this household not awake? How is cabin 27 nearby not hearing that, you know?
Yep, exactly. I mean, I doubt some screams didn't get bled out. You know what I mean? Like they entered in, they're forcing the way through. I'm sure someone's screaming or yelling.
Right. I mean, it's totally possible, but we have to remember too, my other instinct is Ricky and Greg are 9 and 5 respectively. And so it's entirely possible that out of fear, out of a worry of being punished, out of whatever a child's mind might be going through, maybe they did hear it and maybe they were threatened, or maybe they didn't want to be forthcoming about it lest something befall them. Again, I'm extrapolating possible realities, but
true. I mean, definitely a possibility.
Yeah. And with that in mind, actually, one of the surviving children, Justin Smart, this was the neighbor, not the younger brothers. At first, he had told investigators that he slept through these attacks. He had no idea that these attacks had happened, that people were hurt or anything like that. But later, he actually claimed he was dreaming about it. So he knew something was happening, but it was a dream. So in this dream, as he says, he claims he saw 2 men wearing glasses with Sue on a boat. One with long hair and the other with a mustache. He said that one of the men actually had a hammer. And it's also worth pointing out that the night before, they stayed up watching Love Boat.
Interesting.
Wow, a 1976 sitcom with 10 seasons. I've heard of Love Boat. I had to look this up.
10 seasons.
10 strong seasons.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. Anyway, I just went down the rabbit hole. I had to look it up. I'm the man in the chair today. But yeah, so that could impress upon his observations, his dreams. What's interesting is them going out the back window prevents their memories from being contaminated, as it were. So they couldn't create too many accurate false memories. But we do have Love Boat coming to play, and maybe that's why he's thinking about being on a boat and all of these things. But there are some elements here that will ring true. Speaking of like a body of water, we'll talk about that in the theories. Again, I'm very T-centric this episode, but it's just interesting to me that Justin later kind of shifted the story from I slept through it, don't know anything, to, well, hold on a minute, I guess I know some stuff, but maybe it was just a dream. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about it before, but like, oh man, having to recall all the different details is just so hard. And then you have all the trauma on top of that. Good luck.
100%. Now, regarding what he saw that night, police were able to make composite sketches based on what Justin reported. And after this, little known progress was ever made on the case. But I'm going to share with you now the composite sketches, just to give you a rough idea of what these two individuals, per Justin, might have looked like.
Interesting. Both wearing glasses, like both male.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you change the haircut, you shave the mustache on the guy on the left. It's like, how do you kind of pinpoint that guy down? You know, you have, sure, if he's wearing exactly that look, the parted hair down the middle, same with the other guy, but longer. And then they both have the mustaches, but then what if they shave it, dye their hair or whatnot?
Yeah, or take a wig off. I've seen videos where FBI
true.
agents show what quick changing disguises can look like. And it's actually pretty astounding. It's not like movie level, certainly not like Mission Impossible level where the voice changes and everything. But like, yeah, they'll wear layered wigs or wigs that have pieces so it can go from long hair to short hair to bald up top to fully bald. And a beard can turn into a goatee, can turn into a mustache, into a soul patch, whatever. It's wild.
Yeah, so it's just all over the place then at that point.
Yeah. Not that these two guys would be doing that, but it is a very basic sketch, based on what Justin saw, but otherwise like no certainly defining features. And that's kind of where this case went cold for the most part. Not much more progress, as I indicated, kind of was made. And now I jump forward to the 3rd anniversary of the murder. Somewhere in April of 1984, there was a man searching for bottles, and while doing so, discovered a portion of a human skull at Camp 18 near Feather Falls. This is roughly 60 miles south of Keddie. 2 months later, so in April he finds it, 2 months later in June of the same year, a pathologist confirmed that the remains belonged to Tina Sharp. So now we know where Tina ended up, forensically and everything. She's 60 miles south in Camp 18 near Feather Falls, so kind of off in like, again, this is all kind of countryside, so it's
right, yeah.
But we know her final resting place. We know that she wasn't fully abducted. She was taken from the scene, and that's where she met her end, I suppose, or where her body did.
Yeah.
Now, at some point, because of the discovery of Tina's remains, or maybe because of it coincided with, I should say, the case was closed. Many have argued that the police did not have enough information to do so. After all, we still don't have a convicted suspect. This is still open-ended, but there were never any arrests made despite major suspects, and who we'll talk about, in the theories section. But that's, again, at the time where the case just stopped. Cold, shut, end. Whoever did this got away with it.
It's wild to think that just people have gotten away with it and just lived out their lives.
Yeah, terrifying. You're going to the grocery store, these people might be there.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, right? Neighbors or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
People you have over your house and just don't know that they have committed such heinous crimes, and they're just living their life now.
Yeah. Now, as I indicated before, this case has since been reopened. In 2013, in fact, by the sheriff of Plumas County, Greg Hagwood. He actually had personal connections to the Sharps. On one hand, he had gone to school with Johnny and Dana, two of the victims, and on the other hand, Hagwood had hired Officer Mike Gamberg, who was also part of this case, who had taught John and Dana in a martial arts class in the past. So Gamberg was a deputy officer in 1981, and Hagberg brought him back as a special investigator for this. In reopening the case, they found evidence that had appeared to be lost at the time. Now, one piece of evidence was a recording of a phone call, and the police had received just days after the remains were found in Feather Falls. So again, 3 years after the crime, but days after the skull was found in Feather Fall. And this was also before they identified it as Tina's. So remember that. The caller said this, quote, "I was watching the news and they were talking about the girl found at Feather Falls. I was just wondering if you thought of the murder up in Keddie, in Plumas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found." End quote. So whether it was intuition or something more nefarious, this caller accurately described the remains as a girl and connected them to the murder 3 years ago prior, right? Before the public knew that it was Tina.
Damn. It's like a good breakthrough, I guess. But also, it's gotta be infuriating and frustrating, because you're supposed to be able to rely on the police. You're supposed to, you know what I mean? But information was, if not pursued, or case was closed or mishandled, it's who do you go to,
Yeah, I mean,
do you drive to a different jurisdiction and then make a complaint against how do you even, where do you even begin with that one,
It's hard to say, because we're not living in the moment that this is all going down. And so we don't have all the information that the police might have had. We're looking back on it, with hindsight a little bit. So on one hand, it does stand out to me. How did this person kind of connect it to that murder? How did they know it was a girl? But the other side of that coin is, this is a small town area. Maybe this is the only major crime that's ever happened. So it's the front of this person's mind. And so police are like, that's a good thought. Maybe we can connect this. 2 months later, oh, we connected it, but there's nothing else to go off of. So again, I don't want to suspect that there's something way deeper. It is interesting, but this call, regardless of how you feel about it, the call was not investigated any further. However, it is because of the modern investigation that this was brought back to the table, and they attempted to analyze the voice, see if they could try to get essentially a vocal footprint so they could match this to somebody else, maybe.
Okay, guys, I was about to say, how do you not investigate this in any way, shape, or form at all whatsoever?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's what we know.
Yeah.
That it didn't really go much anywhere else, but yeah. Additionally, there are 6 unnamed suspects that the police are looking into during the current investigation. So something's happening. Progress is being made, and a lot of it is staying on the quieter side, which is totally understandable.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Which, even if there was more public about it, we don't normally touch on super modern cases lest we perpetuate false information that is not yet confirmed, all that stuff.
Yep.
But I will say this. Hagwood told People magazine in 2016, quote, "There are people locally who know more than they've said, and I believe we've identified some of them, and we know who they are, and we know where they are. And I have every confidence that they either participated after the fact or they have first-hand information. It's obviously a worthwhile pursuit. There is not an expiration date to homicides, and to the extent that we have surviving siblings and family members, it is our fundamental obligation to them to understand who did this and why." End quote. Period. Hagwood gets it.
Yeah. I mean, well said. There's no other way to put it. Yeah.
I love the respect he's slathering in there, but also keeping his cards a little closer to the chest, firmly investigating something.
Yep. That was a good statement. That's very well said and done.
Absolutely. So both officers in the end believe that more than one person was involved with the murders, and that Tina Sharp is at the center of it due to her abduction prior to death. So now, as we head into the theories, I'm curious as to your initial instincts. Mine at first were, we have a green van, we have John and his friend hitchhiking back home sometime, in the evening. We don't know exactly when. This is the perfect opportunity for someone to arrive at the place, allow the door to open so the two boys can come in, and now there's an open way for whoever drove them to be able to get in. That's an anonymous suspect. And then also the other opportunity is when Tina comes home and she needs to get through the door. So maybe people are also waiting and seeing that certain doors are open. It's really hard. I feel like we narrow it in, but then when I start to think about it more, it actually reopens up wide again.
Yeah, it just kind of man, I can't pinpoint it down because it just seems like there's so many moving pieces and parts.
Yeah.
And different time frames. Or I like if you were to just spread that on out on a piece of paper, just go, well, I mean, there's gaps here, it could be anything, anytime. Oh man, yeah, there's just so much movement.
You almost made me really proud. I thought you were going to quote Lord of the Rings and say something like, spread like butter over too much toast. A little Bilbo Baggins action.
Bilbo.
Okay, well, I know I've teased this a few times now, so let me dive in to the main suspect of the Keddie Cabin Murders. Of course, there are others out there, cards close to the chest, but I'm very curious what you think about this one. So, Martin Smart was a neighbor, as well as Justin Smart's father. If you remember the name, Justin Smart was one of the boys in the back room sleeping. Now, depending on the source, Martin Smart lived either 1 or 2 cabins away from the Sharps and had a roommate named John Bo Boobaday. So Boobaday was involved in organized crimes. This is a fact that we know, and had only lived with the Smarts for about 10 days by the time of the murder. It's worth mentioning that Martin himself also had a record. These are facts, right? After the murders, he told the Department of Justice that his blue-handled claw hammer was strangely missing around the time of the murders. As you recall, a hammer was part of the crime scene.
Yep.
Well, this particular hammer, not the wound-based, okay, we know a hammer was involved kind of hammer, this blue-clawed hammer was found in a pond nearby on March 24th of 2016. Gamberg told the Sacramento Bee, quote, the location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced, end quote. So what Gamberg is saying is, it wouldn't have just been like, oh, la-di-da, I'm doing my job, I'm living my life, I'm a carpenter, oops, I lost my hammer, it ended up in the pond. He's basically saying, in order for it to get to where it was in the pond and to the pond in the first place, somebody would have had to go out of their way or chuck it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Indicating that, okay, so we found a blue hammer, we know a hammer matches some of the wounds, and you said yours just went missing. And this one is in a place that Gamberg is like, this is a suspicious spot for your hammer to be. Feels like it is a murder weapon.
Dude. See, here's the thing, okay? And this is what happens with Red Web. This to me seems like, boom, got him. You know what I mean? But you're going to throw something at me, or the dude was gone for a month or was in space for 5 years or something. And then they just go, well, how did they do it? Maybe they didn't do it, or because it's a mystery.
Yeah, well, we'll hold on to that feeling. We'll see how we feel by the end of this one. So, shortly after the murders, Martin's wife Marilyn left him, and Martin then moved to Reno, Nevada. Reportedly, Martin was abusive, so Marilyn went to Sue for advice, since she had unfortunately similar experiences. Now, as this theory goes, Martin did not like that Sue had told Marilyn to leave him, therefore giving Martin motive to want to attack Sue. The night of the murders, Martin and Boobaday showed up at a local bar around 10 p.m., both wearing 3-piece suits. It has been theorized they intentionally drew attention to themselves by wearing such fancy attire to the bar in order to establish an alibi. Hey, let's go to the bar, make a scene, look handsome, and then disappear and do a crime.
Yeah, what the hell? I also feel like, how is that going to work when people are like, yeah, I saw him there, but I don't know, I didn't really see him past like this time.
Right. If you want to develop an alibi, leave the suspicious suit at home, go on over there, dance to Cotton Eye Joe, do the Cupid Shuffle, whatever it is, start a conga line. That'll get a memory going.
Right. Don't be overly suspicious where it's like, well, I saw the bright blue suit for 2 hours and then it was gone for like an hour. Then it came back or it never came back.
Right. The suit came back red.
More so like, yeah, I do recall seeing that person. And I don't know. I wasn't, nothing drew me to them.
Yeah.
So I didn't keep tabs on them.
100%. So in the current ongoing investigation, Hagwood and Gamberg located a piece of evidence that was left aside or maybe forgotten about. This evidence was a letter from Martin to Marilyn, written 16 days after the murder, stating, and this is so on the nose. Here's the letter, quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we're through? Great, what else do you want?" End quote. That's like a confession.
That seems like a straight up confession.
Mm-hmm. So Marilyn claims that she never received this letter, but when looking at it with investigators, she did recognize the handwriting as Martin's. So maybe this is something that he wrote, intended to give her, but either misplaced or she never found or what have you. But either way, it was evidence that the initial investigation had and didn't continue to go through with. The question is why?
Yeah, why? It just seems so smoking gun. Like we got him.
That's like Jinx, right?
Yeah.
Of course I killed them all. And now we have Jinx 2, which I don't know what happens in that one, but like, you got him. How is there more?
Yep.
So Gamberg also discovered that Martin's former Reno counselor claimed that he admitted to murdering the 4 victims of the Keddie Cabin murders, but the Department of Justice determined that this was hearsay. So let me give you some context as to who and why he's got this counselor. I should mention that this was his counselor at a VA hospital where he sought treatment for PTSD, stress, and anger management after his time in Vietnam. He was a vet, and so he was stricken with some of these unfortunate circumstances coming out of such a wild time, to put it extremely mildly. And so I don't want to vilify these elements, but they are important to note, right? And in talking with his counselor, the counselor is saying that he confessed. And there is patient confidentiality. I don't know the legalities behind that, if it like keeps you safe. But either way, the Department of Justice is saying, well, that's just hearsay. Therefore, we can't look any closer, any further. We can't take that as evidence. In general, many theorize that Martin and Bubiday worked together to murder the victims and left the boys spared since his son was in the room. Both of these men are now dead, but it's possible someone connected to them knows something about the murders. Again, we have 6 anonymous individuals that could have aided, assisted, known about. And so maybe in the future, we'll have more information as to who did this and why people might have helped.
It does make sense as to why the boys were left unharmed, because it's one of his boys.
Absolutely. And remember, not that I'm putting any blame on Justin, but Justin was the one quoted as having remembered a few things, and he's the one that created or helped create the sketch of the 2 potential perpetrators. And so, you'd think he would recognize his father, but again, was it a dream? It's muddy, right? It gets very muddy very quickly. But if he did see his dad, is there, again, that level of fear to say something honest? Or, hey, that's my dad, I don't want to be too honest, or but you're also, I don't know. Again, I don't want to put too much out there. I'm speculating, but it's just difficult because a child in this situation, this emotionally raw scenario, it's just hard to fathom. And I feel terrible for anybody, like all of this family, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a bad situation, like through and through. Pretty much as worst case scenarios you can get,
Yeah, absolutely. So this then leads to the next theory. And instead of a suspect, it's kind of a layer. So it's rumored, right? We talked about evidence being mishandled, not looked into, potentially lost, or dare I say, forgotten, to go with the conspiracy theory, or air quotes forgotten, right? So it's rumored, right, that the police of Keddie were involved in a cover-up of the murders. Why would that be? Well, let's talk about it. So before we do though, much of the evidence from the time period seems to have been overlooked. According to Plumas County News, the case history log, which shows which officer did what and when, is missing. Leads were not followed up on, and furthermore, Evidence in storage is disorganized and possibly contaminated as a result. So DNA testing, as we hinted at earlier, might not be possible because of that contamination. Though luckily, one piece of evidence, a piece of medical tape, still had DNA on it that matched the tape used to bound the victim. So there is a possibility that a modern investigation could cut through that noise of mishandling, but that's a fingers crossed kind of scenario.
How does that many balls get dropped on a case like that? Things going missing, things not. Yeah, that's. Man, I don't know. I feel like it's a small town and this is a big case, and then for it to be possibly mishandled this much. I don't know.
So I've got a few things before I get here, but to your point, I really want to just dive into this element. Why would this happen? Why are we looking at the police with a suspicion? Because normally, I want to trust an investigator to figure out the crime and all of that. I want to give the benefit of the doubt. So what is the motive behind this conspiracy? Well, reportedly, Boubede was an informant for the FBI, right? So we know both of these men were criminals. And it's possible, right? That it's possible that the FBI saw this Boubede as somebody who had ties to that criminal world. And as a plea deal or something, allowing him to stay out, he would be an informant and allow them to know a little bit more, which would then lead to more arrests than just the one. So some believe that this would mean that when this crime came to pass and it was clear that Boubede and Smart were the perpetrators, that either the FBI and or the Department of Justice kind of wanted to cover it up so as to maintain this role in the investigation. It's to maintain this informant area, because if otherwise they were forced to arrest these two, it could kill other investigations. Again, that's as the theory goes. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but at what point do you kind of go, we need to, we can't cover these up for the sake of connections and whatnot. You know what I mean?
God, the cost is outweighing the benefit right now.
Yeah, that's a tough decision. I never want to make. Oh God, yeah. My goodness.
Again, this is a conspiracy. It's a theory. So we don't know what's theoretically on the other side of this. If they were on the cusp of getting the entire Chicago mafia down, then that is an impossible decision to make. But otherwise, if it's just an informant, I'm sitting here going, half of a family was slaughtered. Put this man away. I'm sorry, you're losing your informant, because if he stays out here, the cost is outweighing whatever you're getting. I don't know.
Yep.
Coming back though, a few elements to this theory. That is the motive behind it all. But what's interesting though is that Gamberg was fired just before the murders, but then rehired soon after them. Though after he was rehired, he was not allowed to assist with this case. Sure, it's interesting, especially with hindsight, but I don't know if that guarantees this theory, but it is an element to this theory. And then Hagwood told People magazine, quote, "I am not by nature a conspiracy theorist, but there are facts and circumstances, the number and the nature of which I can't ignore anymore." So even Hagwood himself is starting to go, man, it's like, if something was mishandled, that happens. If something was forgotten, that happens. But the amount with which they didn't follow up on this, they didn't track that.
Yep.
Records that are permanent are lost. All of these things just start to really stand out. And so whether it's the informant motive or some other motive, it's nefarious, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess.
And then coming back to Sheila Sharp, she told CBS News in 2016, quote, "I was told the suspects were told to get out of town. So to me, that means it was covered up." So that is her opinion. That is her disposition. This is somebody who is very close to this case. Now, it's really hard to say. I'm not an insider. I've only got the information that's publicly available like everybody else. But this suddenly, like I said, I feel like we had the guy or the two guys, and now we're getting real muddy. Was it a cover-up? Is this smoke and mirrors? Oh, I don't know. And we might not ever know.
Oh man, this is just so all over the place. It's so unfortunate. And then it just I how do you, as a family member, like sleep at night knowing that, like, I don't know, right? Like, not only did this happen, but it could be covered up, like could be mishandled, or just like mishandled, like
the very justice system that you're using as a blanket of security might also be the very justice system that could cover something up like this. Yeah, that's really unsettling, you know?
Yeah, just extra feelings and emotions that you shouldn't have to deal with.
Sure. Now, with everything, there's always a wrinkle, and I always want to do that due diligence. And there's a quote that comes to mind. You know me, I talk about Occam's razor all the time. We got another razor we're going to talk about. Now, while many people do believe the cover-up angle, it's also possible that the sheriff's office in Plumas County was simply poorly trained and underprepared for such a case. They're a smaller department, kind of off in the wilderness of California. That doesn't excuse mishandling things, but ignorance doesn't excuse them for dropping the ball. But as Hanlon's razor states, quote, "Never attribute to malice that which can adequately be explained by stupidity." It is just possible that it was ignorance that created all of this. Unprepared, untrained, just not ready for something of this caliber. Ignorance.
I mean, yeah, you're in a smaller town. You don't see action like, you know, people do every day in New York City or LA, you know?
I mean, you've always got the trope of the sleepy town sheriff who's walking around. He's the only guy on scene. You know, I think of Stranger Things. Nothing much happens, but, you know, and so, you know, you got the trope, right? Where they're like, it's fine, nothing to see here. And then, but you as the viewer are going, Jason Voorhees is out here or whatever.
Right.
And, you know, so again, I don't know how to feel about this. It's fascinating. I love the entertainment value of a conspiracy theory, but this is like a sinister case with such vivid suspects that I feel like it's them. And then we also have like, but how did they get away? Why did they get away? Was it a cover up? Was it just mishandled? I don't know, but it's unfortunate. That's just like period, end of sentence. That's what it is.
I know. The thing that makes this one so rough is the fact that, like, there's enough evidence to suspect that there's something going on with either an individual's involvement or, you know, the police department mishandling things, possibly a cover up, but not enough for you to actually go after someone, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Because, yeah, you know, being a vet, there is PTSD. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just go after someone because they're suffering from something that's very real, you know?
Right.
And yeah, a small town, sure, you like have read the books and have done the police work and training for bigger cases or murder crime scenes like this. But if you go half a decade without flexing that muscle, it just atrophies, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, Task Force. We have a whole Discord that you can access via our Patreon, patreon.com/redweb. We have threads in there where we theorize as to each and every episode's got kind of a thread where we theorize. There's ongoing conversations, but this particular episode, it's one of those unique moments. And again, it's got a foot in the past, and that's why we kind of talked about it. But there is this ongoing investigation. And because of that, I want to give a few extra nuggets of information. And this comes from the Sacramento Bee as of 2016. Quote, "A $5,000 reward has been offered for information leading to the arrest and prosecution of the perpetrators. Tips or information about the Keddie murders can be given anonymously by calling the Plumas County Sheriff's Office at 530-283-6360. The Secret Witness Program at 775-322-4900, sending a text message to 847-411, keyword SW, and submitting information online at secretwitness.com or emailing Gamberg at gamberg@pcso.net. End quote. Now, of course, please, Task Force, I know this goes without saying, don't throw a bunch of theories their way. Don't clog the works. This is an active investigation with real stakes. So this is more for posterity in case anybody happens to know anything. I would be remiss to not quote this search for further information. But yeah, it's just one of those cases that just leaves me heartbroken. Of course, it's a violent case. That goes without saying. But it's just to see another case where, again, I refer to this all the time, the Zodiac Killer, we feel like we got so close, and it feels like that's the guy. Whether it be legal loopholes, ignorance, or malintent, somehow the perpetrator walked free, and they walked free until the natural end of their life. And that just doesn't sit right with me. But
100%.
sometimes that happens, man, and life can suck like that.
It really does, though.
Yeah. But I don't know, man. Wild times. Wild frickin' times.
Wild case, too.
Wild case for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a big discussion case for sure.
100%. And even down to the conspiracy theory, you know? There's opinions that can play in conspiracy theories. That's why I like to entertain conspiracies, but then approach them with practicality. What are the facts of the matter? What do we know and what is provable? And man, it's what makes some of these true crime cases so just gut-wrenching, because you want the answer so bad. But this has been the Keddie Cabin Murders. A wild one, of course, to say the least. But with that said, Fredo, I will see you back here next Monday for yet another mystery.